Hello everyone, it's Chris here. Welcome back to the GMJ Book Channel. I have to say it's not as big as the Legacy Conversations, but you know what? I'm having fun here because I can speak quite frankly to you. And this is where we speak about the books. I wrote many books in my life. I would say more than 60 anyway. And so it's going to take me 6 months and more to actually make a short overview of every book I wrote. But I had fun writing these books, and my life has definitely changed for the better because I wrote them. And I really hope that if you should read the books, that you will also find something there which is of good, which brings joy to you, which makes you think, or perhaps you can learn something, or perhaps you just enjoy it. That is all good. That's all good. The books are a bit suppressed. They are very straightforward. Um, they don't deal with American characters at all. In fact, many people would consider the books to be a bit negative against NATO and the US, but in fact, it's more written as warnings. If you ask me who's the author, I will tell you it's written as warnings to tell the people, listen, you're not as great as you think you are. You are heading for defeat. You better up your standards. You're not as good, and you better wake up. So all the books are about J books now, the George M. James series, which is 54 right now. Might be more by the time you see here, I don't know. They all deal with counterterrorism, a little bit of espionage, but basically counterterrorism, and all of them are based upon either training scenarios or something which did happen, but might be disguised, of course. In that world, you can't really uh, tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God, because many of these teams and people are still out there. They're still operational. And so we're very careful how we do this. But each book has a different subject matter, and each book has warnings in them. So you have to read them, and you have to read between the lines as well. Of course, you can't just read them. You can also listen to them. Most of them are on audio. All of them is on Amazon. Not one of them would be at the Apple, because I consider Apple to be a supporters of terrorism. I explain in many of the videos why. It has to do with San Bernardino in 2015. I'm not going to go into it again. I know there's a lot of you who watched the previous videos, but there might be some of you who don't. And then if you're new here, then welcome, and I'm glad you're here. And if you're wondering about the Signed Legacy Conversations, now that's the main channel. That is where we speak to South African military veterans as well as police and intelligence, where we can get hold of them on both sides. If somebody wants to come who was part of a freedom struggle, he's more than welcome. Simply because we're a forgotten generation, we're the same as the Vietnam generation in the US, meaning that the war was fought quite far away for the army, mostly, and then the lads would come home and nobody really cared. In fact, it would have been hard for you in the country to even know there's a war going on in those days. And yet it lasted for 23 years, mostly in Angola, northern parts of Namibia. But in fact, there was a second war just as cruel and horrible going on inside the country, which was more like a civil war. We had different factions fighting to each other, and then the police, where I come from, when we had to try and keep peace between these people, and we failed. A lot of people died. As far as we were concerned, um, we were fighting communism, and of course, you're fighting for your mate right next to you. We didn't really, we didn't know anything else than apartheid to begin with for the foreigners here. And we did apologize for it later. Of course, we're still paying the price. We will pay the price for generations to come. Even though apartheid was actually started by the Brits in 1910, they brought out two acts. One prohibiting where people can live, so-called Group Area Act. And then they also started prohibiting people from having relationships across the color line. Up to when you could do that if you could afford it, up to a point. But then it became law. And it was the same in many, many countries. I mean, even the US had those type of things going on till middle 60s and then later almost. It's you have to read the books. You have to understand where these people come from. Don't just think that everybody is racist. Because there are three main characters in this book, in the entire series, and one of them is black, it's a Zulu man. And he's treated with absolute respect and he's listened to when he speaks. That's a word of wisdom. So I wrote the books are really a bit strange. I wrote it not according to the timeline. The first 5 books of a series should actually be read at the back, at the last books. So the first book is actually not the one first published, which is codenamed VF0565, which I made a video about some time ago. It's a great book. All of them are great books. I mean, man, I'm the author. I'm not going to say to you it's a bad book. But from the reviews which I've seen, and I don't really look at reviews, but there are people who contact me. People did learn something, they did enjoy it, and they do like the characters, who's based upon real people. But once again, as I always say in these episodes, not everything you read in a book which is called fiction is of course the truth, and so help me God. But the history inside, the weapons, the systems, the tradecraft, the spycraft, all these things are for real. If a character will start speaking history to you, then of course he knows what he's talking about. It's researched. Now, anyway, so the first book actually which was written is codename VF0565. Let me just say that. That's the first book you'll see when you look at it. But that is not actually the book you should read first. And if you read it, I'm happy because it's a good book. And the name of the book, all the names has something to do with, well, they're codes, so they might refer to something else than what you know or necessarily will know what it's about. It might refer to something else. But that is just the author joke in between. Many authors do that. They write in codes or something which their family or somebody will read it and know exactly what he's talking about, but you would take it at face value. VF0565, by the way, was the code which was flashed to activate the sleeper agents who then became involved in the Great Game. And I suppose I can say I was one of them. And it took many years. It took from almost 1989, end of 89 till 98 before that code was flashed. And it was flashed only after the US embassies were attacked in sub-Saharan Africa. I think in Kenya more than 200 died. And another one was blown up. And that started the jihadi movements really in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. And that was basically the enemy. But I just want to say to you, don't think that just because there's a tiny population of a certain religious group is making trouble and doing things and things like that, don't judge everybody because of that. It's wrong. It's the same as saying, the Israeli Air Force has bombed a hospital in Gaza and therefore all Jews are horrible people. No, man, you can't say that. That's just not true. All Israelis agree with that type of thing. It is just not true. I mean, you have to judge individually. There is no such thing as mass punishment or it's against international law. Ask me, I was a human rights attorney at one stage in my life before I went to the shadows. So the book I want to discuss to you today is called Codename Foxtrot. Now, Foxtrot is actually the first book in the series. That's the one which you should start reading. That's the one if you want to read all the books, and I don't think anybody did that. I always say I have a challenge out there. If there's any one of you who've ever read all the books and you can prove that to me, man, I'll give you something. Because I don't think anybody except myself has ever read all of it. And as I say, they do refer to each other, and this book particular is being referred to quite often because there's a lot of things which set up the story, which is important to know. But of course, when it's referred to by the other books, it's not referred to in detail. You know what I mean? And what I've done also is, I would say in the books, C code name, whatever, for more details. And then you know where this comes from and where this story has been told in detail. But as I also said to you, every single book can be read separately as a story, and every one of them deals with something. Like this one deals with the death of a soul, of a soulmate. Actually, two of them. Now, perhaps I should explain to you that when I started writing these books, starting with VFO, that was after my wife passed. She was the second wife I actually lost to death. And may I say, I was very, very angry with God. And if you're in that situation, my advice to you is don't get angry with God. It's life. She's sleeping now, and one day, with the return of Jesus, according to my faith, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, been for the last few years, and I will die one. She's sleeping, and there will come a time when we see each other again. Of course, there's no such thing as marriage in heaven. It will be different. Jesus was asked that question, and he answered it like that. It's different here, but it's better. So not all is lost with death. That's what I learned. And I also learned not to run away from God, not to get angry, but to actually turn towards God. Because, I always believed that a man will always die first because you're normally the oldest. And then that happened twice. I don't speak a lot about her in the books. There's a lot of quotes for her in the books. Basically, I can say to you, she was an American patriot of the highest standards. Great heart, big heart, a wonderful person. She had her, she had a list of important things in life totally sorted out. She would put God first, and then she would put the US of A, obviously, by which she meant the US Navy. Then she would put in the aircraft carrier, the Ronald Reagan. Then the man himself, the late president. And then some time later, I might arrive in no order of importance. And of course, I'm saying this with a little bit of a smile, but that I tell you exactly how she was. When we first met, her first words to me was something like, "Hey, I'm your soul. Why don't you recognize me? What's wrong with you?" When a woman says that to you, man, you either run away or you're intrigued. I'm not sure which one, but I didn't run away. And she had knowledge. She had superb knowledge on everything. She was, at that stage, a computer programmer working for the US Navy. She would be programming their software for simulations. In other words, if the US Navy wants to attack Iran, which they're threatening to do all the time, but I doubt if they will, but let's say they do, it won't just happen. They will fly like simulated missions before. Now, obviously, if you, as an enemy from a US viewpoint, agent or spy, if you want to use that ugly word, intelligence officer, if you want to know what the US is going on about, you find out what they're practicing. Because they'll be practicing it over and over and over again. Once you know that and you can get access to that, of course, it's over. Because I'll ambush you. I will most certainly ambush you, and I will most certainly create havoc, and then I will strike back. When I say I mean NATO enemies. Now, you have to understand something. South Africa, the new South Africa, is not a NATO-orientated country. The old apartheid government, and before that, definitely was. South Africa fought with the West in the First World War, the Second World War, Korea, and then it had its own war against what we consider to be communist, and it was actually. You should read the books. There's a lot of history in the books, and then it changed when the new people came to power. We're not that new anymore. It's more than 2 decades later now. They changed. They're a BRICS country, and they're a major BRICS country, and they're a BRICS country because they control the Cape of Good Hope. I really should make a video on BRICS as well here, because a lot of people don't understand BRICS. It's something which the US and the West only found out about 6 months ago when you woke up to what I've been warning you since 2014. been warning, and of course, who cares? Nobody listens. But that doesn't matter. Let us talk about this book. It's the first book, let me say it. It's the one I want you to read. Now, just let me give you a brief background of the characters. As I said, there were 3 of them. There still are. Every single book which is not fiction, or which is fiction, the non-fiction books will not feature these characters. There are 5 of them as well. But we'll deal with them as we go along. The first and the main character in the entire story is a woman called Angelique Dawson. There's reasons why she's called Angelique Dawson. It's not her real name. She's based upon somebody I used to know very well. You ask me where she is, I'm not answering you. Ask me what happened to her, I'm not answering you. Don't ask me such things, I can't tell you. I will not. But Angelique, in the books anyway, is the main character because she's the head of counter-terrorism and later counter-espionage of the South African Secret Service. Now a lot of people here would now roll their eyes and, oh, let me tell you, they're actually quite good. I worked with them for many years. And they are silent people. You don't really hear from them. What you see in the news is mostly the political people who is the political appointees, and the bastards get appointed and they just screw up what they would have screwed up anywhere. Even if you appointed them as to open doors somewhere, which is basically all they're capable of doing, they would still be screwing up. But nobody really knows about the real spies working somewhere. You can think of them as in the same as MI6 and CIA. Then you understand, they don't work in South Africa, well, they're not supposed to. Do they? Yes. Read the books. There's many of the things which I explained to you there, and they are very, very good actually, and they run networks right across Africa. But at some stage, and this is in the books, and it's denied, but let's just say, let me just tell you a story. But somewhere along the line, people decided they need a more active arm. Now, the old National Intelligence Service, which was our apartheid time intelligence service, never had that. They were straightforward spies. They couldn't go and do some wet work as KGB and Russians or Soviet Union were referring to, and always going to kill people. Now, the Americans have such units, they call it SAD, and I personally think they are SAD. I don't rate them highly. The Special Activities Division, they make a lot of mistakes in Africa. We know exactly who they are. They recruit from the wrong people. They just get people from, special forces, people like that. Since your special forces in the US is to us rated low, we don't think much of you. And I have every reason in the book to say that. Don't get angry with me. These are warnings. You have to read the books, and I will highlight their failures to you and tell you what you shouldn't do and what you should do, or rather, I'll make suggestions. But whether you listen or not, I don't care. At the end of the day, I'm neutral, man. This is not my fight. But the point I'm making here is they're recruiting from these people, and that is a major error. They're not good. They cannot operate in countries where they are not sort of welcomed. So in other words, you will find them working in a place like Ukraine. You'll find them working in a place like Kenya or Somalia or Iraq or Afghanistan. But all these places have a US presence. All of them. All of them. It's the same with US Special Forces. They will be operating in countries where they are sort of welcome. It is very seldom that you find these people in a country where they're not welcome. Where they're actually behind enemy lines, not sort of enemies. And they've done well. In fact, they worked with Mossad at one stage about 10 years ago, and they took out a guy who was involved with the planning of the Beirut bombings, I think in 1984. I don't know if you remember that, and there was a CIA, the head of the CIA there was actually captured and tortured to death. He's also in the books. And they got him with a roadside bomb, I think in Syria at some stage. But mostly they cannot operate like that. But we can. We can operate behind enemy lines, and we do. And Angelique Dawson now is, in the books anyway, in charge of these operations. But she has a secret, it comes out in the books. I'm not giving anything away to you, but she's not actually only working for the South Africans. She's also working for France. So there's that angle where she's trained too well. That is one of the problems which came out in a book called Codename um, Willow Bay. Because in Willow Bay, she asked the other character, which I'll get to now, to train her in halo jumping as well as AO. Now, that is where you exit from the aircraft at as high as that thing can go. Let's say 53,000 feet. And with AO, you will get out, stabilize, open your parachute. And it is my flippin' cold up there, I can tell you. You have a suit on which is heated up. You have a compass, and you're in front of you, and you can drift about 55 miles before you have to land. So it's a way of infiltrating. And it's only special forces who can do that. And very few of them do. And then you find a halo jump where you just jump. That's so common. It's almost like eating an ice cream. You just fall down, straight down, out of the aircraft for about 30,000 feet. You have oxygen on, of course. You have oxygen on the AO2. You fall down at a certain height, about 12,500 feet. You can take the oxygen off because now you can start breathing. But you can keep it on as well, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. You just jump down and you open your chute at about 2,500 feet or wherever. Some people open them lower. It depends on where you're jumping. There's quite a crack when those parachutes go open, and therefore you don't want to betray your presence. If you go to Legacy Conversations, the other channel, you will hear the Special Forces people talk about these jumps and how it's done, and they did it for real. Or you can just read the J&J books where many, many times you're going to go through this entire motion. How do you do that jump? It doesn't just start with you getting into the aircraft. No, you had to breathe oxygen beforehand. They check your tooth and everything, your teeth, because at that height there can be serious trouble if something goes wrong with that. Then you go up inside the aircraft, you're still breathing oxygen. At some stage you'll switch to your internal oxygen. Then you're heavily, heavily loaded. You would walk to the back, the ramp goes down, it's flipping cold, minus 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you just fall out there, and then you do what you need to do, and the aircraft get back. One of the guys, actually, I think it was my mate SV Fourie, who was a demolition expert in one reconnaissance commando, later regiment. Great guy, wrote a very good book. In fact, we wrote it together, called 10 Years in South African Special Forces, Sierra Whiskey. Yes, the same author who wrote his other books also wrote that book with him. And one of his things, he talks about doing this course, doing Halo. And he said the aircraft was so high that when he walked to the back, the thing started tilting like this with his weight because there's no air around it. It was a C-150, and then they went out. If you listen to another friend of Legacy, Captain Walter Weiss, he was a SAF captain, an Air Force pilot, later became an airline pilot. And he said they were flying one of these aircraft, also with one of these jumps, and they ran out of oxygen in the cockpit. And they had to get down very quickly. They would have lost that air crew and aircraft completely. They haven't, because I think the navigator or somebody, or the co-pilot, was already passed out. So it's dangerous. It's dangerous. And these things come all out in the books as well. But I had to set it up because remember now we have Angelique there. And then we have one of the chief agents. Let's call it a chief agent and bodyguard, later a husband, because the two of them really like each other. It's a guy called Major Jeffrey Foxtrot. Now, as I reveal in one of the other episodes, Foxtrot is actually a very interesting name. In the book, he says he got the name because he's a policeman. He was in Police Special Forces, and then he went to Army Special Forces. He says he was doing his counterinsurgency course, and he was at a base called Foxtrot, at a place called Mileuskop, and that's where he did his training, and the sergeants and just started telling him, shouting at him, Foxtrot, come here, and he would arrive because they were looking at him and he just took the name. Yeah, I myself, by the way, was also at Foxtrot base, but I'm not special forces, right? I just write these books, and I was involved, but I can't really tell you too much. In fact, we haven't dealt with it in any book yet, but if you ever read the books and you find a fellow called Ishmael the priest, that is more based upon me than anybody else. But I'll say this to you, everybody was in love with Angelique, including me. She was just fantastic, or she still is. Who knows? Um, yeah, yeah, it's an interesting thing I'll never forget when I saw her first, which is also described in this book, actually, where this Foxtrot is basically recruited to the Shadows and told to bugger off to get out of Special Forces and to go into Africa and establish himself as a sleeper agent. And he takes with him a guy called Geelslong, uh, which is Cape Cobra in Afrikaans, a vicious snake. Geelslong Peter Ndebele, who's a Zulu man and also a Special Forces officer and the biggest mates with Foxtrot. The two of them are like this. I just want to say in another video we reveal that if you should go past the South African Secret Service headquarters in Pretoria East, you go out on the Delmas Road and you keep on driving east, then you will find on the left side, you will see them. It's huge buildings, there's a lot of fences and there's a lot of satellite dishes and things. Also there, they do control the entire African, Sub-Sahara Africa networks and things. They, yeah, if it's revealed in the books, it's not a secret really. They're much better than what people think. And a lot of you will say to me, yeah, but they're not really funded, you know. They only have about, I don't know, $100 million a year or something. Yeah, but they're a BRICS country and they have access to a BRICS country supercomputer and they computers and they work with them. And whatever they find out, they send over to Moscow or Beijing. Yeah, people don't know that. But it's in the books. We reveal it in the books. I've got nothing against them. I worked with them. It was not my parent unit. But in the books they are. But they were not. But I worked with them and I have high respect for them. I have zero respect for the previous lot of the apartheid era one. I don't think anything of them. And also, there was a counter-espionage unit also called NIA, the National Intelligence Agency. That to me was just a national disgrace. And in fact, in these books, they are frequently dealt with where they are found to be protecting jihadis, which they are actually doing. So that was also revealed in the books. And so well, you have to read it. You have to understand why these books were written under a different name. But anyway, if you go past the Secret Service headquarters and you will not find the top spies there, all the operators. You only find the desk people there and a few lower level people and very high level people. But the actual guys doing the work will never meet there. It's too dangerous. And then where the fences and things stops, there's a street coming out from the left. Go there and look at the name of the street. It's called Foxtrot Street. Last time when I was in South Africa, I went there and I took a few pictures. And if I can find the pictures, I will show it to you. Didn't take pictures of the Secret Service headquarters because don't do that. They will find out and they will ask you why you're doing it. So don't ever do that. Just drive past and think of me. Think of the books. Now, this Foxtrot fellow has a history with Angelique which goes back way before they meet. And the simple reason for that is her father is a police general commanding special forces. And Foxtrot is like a son to him. And also Peter Ndebele. Both of them are like the top officers there. They the ones who, this general is booting upwards. He knows these guys are very capable. He sees something in them and they see something in him. And so they're having a great time there. I mean, Foxtrot ends up as a major, as a company commander. His best platoon is run by Captain Geelslong Peter Ndebele. Both of them are due for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel as well as to Major. Both of them are on the road to attain the highest ranks. But then the end came. Mr. Mandela is released. which wasn't that. It was not an easy thing for us who were in the forces at that stage. I mean, we couldn't believe it, and rightly or wrongly, I mean, for us, this was the end of the world. I cannot say to you how bad that was. But we got used to it, and you know what? The officers and men, both of the police and the army, 99.9% of them, showed much loyalty towards the new government. It's just always the way it is. The interesting thing, and I mentioned this in the books as well, is none of these officers and men who came over from the old system had to retake an oath to a new constitution and a new country. That was a major error, because in the Second Anglo-Boer War, the British Army committed to war crimes in the concentration camps. You don't know what I'm talking about, read my books, you'll find out. That's where the word concentration camps actually come from. All those captured Boers by my people, the Afrikaner, had to take a new oath of loyalty towards the Queen, or actually the King at that stage, because Queen Victoria died during the war. Punishment from God, well deserved. But anyway, so they had to retake an oath. Many of them refused to do it. And because they refused to do it, they couldn't go home. So they left for the US and other places. They couldn't go anywhere in the empire. It was the same with before that, when the North and the South in the US had their civil war. And man, I studied that. I can tell you, I never read better books in my life than written by those generals of that era. Wow, those guys were something else. I read them all and I hold them in the highest respect. But when the South rebelled, funny enough, there were never war declared. Do you know that? If you know about war being declared between North and South, tell me. Because I could never find that. War was never declared. It was unofficial. It was a rebellion. And that's what it was. Was it legally? And I'm not an attorney in the US. I qualified in South Africa. But for me, legally speaking, I think I had the right to leave. I don't think they were legally wrong. But of course, the US courts decided differently. So whatever. It had to do with state rights and, of course, the slavery issue. Even though in those days they hit the slavery issue, they don't want to make it a slavery issue, because there were a lot of racism going on in the US at that stage. Today, I don't know. And they thought that the white people wouldn't want to fight if it's about freeing slaves. And there were actually riots in New York, where they tried to recruit people and force people to serve in the Union armies. There were riots. I think that's where the Gatling gun was used first, ever. It's also in some of my books. But the point is, when the South had to surrender, and they did surrender, they had to retake an oath of loyalty towards the Constitution of the Union. In other words, they couldn't just be accepted back. That is also when the Congress people from the South wanted to get back into the US Congress. They couldn't just do it. They had to sort of swore loyalty again. They had to sort of prove to that they are not rebels anymore. And I think there was even an act out to say if you were an officer or a rebel, you couldn't serve in Congress. These things make sense, doesn't it? It is like that. It's just the way it is. And if you look at the Second World War, now I'm a bit of a history fanatic, and you will read all of these things in my books as well. So forgive me if I go into it, but I find it very, very interesting, and it's relevant because, as I said, the New South Africa never demanded an oath of loyalty. Of course, the guys who enlisted afterwards would have taken some oath. But if you look in the Second World War, at some stage, the German officer corps had to take an oath of loyalty towards Adolf Hitler, the Führer himself. And I think it was von Manstein, brilliant general, field marshal. And von Manstein and then said, look, it's not for the man in the field and the general just to mutiny against his leader, especially not if he's taken an oath. It took the military leaders a long time to get over it before they could launch their, 1944 revolt there against Hitler, where most of them ended up dead. including Field Marshal Rommel, Erwin Rommel, who had to commit suicide, was forced to commit suicide. It's tragic. But what I'm trying to say is, for a military man, if you're a military man and you're listening to me now, you understand an oath. You understand that it is like a handshake. Once you've done that, you have to follow your oath. Otherwise, you're not an officer and a gentleman, or at least you're not a gentleman. You know what I mean? It is a serious thing. But sadly, if you look at Congress critters in the 3rd Brigade, as I call the politicians from all over the world, they're all the same breed, then it means nothing to them. It means absolutely nothing to them. So anyway, let's get back to the book. This is where these 3 characters meet for the first time. And when they meet, Foxtrot immediately recognized Angelique. He's never seen her before in real life. But it is described in this book. The general and Angelique's dad then go on to, he's forced to retire. He goes on pension because it's new changes, guys want new leaders, that's it. That's normal in any place where where a revolutionary force actually get control of a modern country. It's always going to be like that. And of course, they got it not through a rifle, but through a vote. We have to remember that too. People forget that today. But he then is captured by some terrorists. Now, the book doesn't say which terrorists, but if you're South African, you can work out it must have been something like APLA, because there were 2 mainstream, which we call terrorists in their words, of course, freedom fighters. There were 2 of them. One group was much, much more radical, meaning that if you can trap him somewhere, he's going to shoot it out. He's not going to surrender. And those were called APLA. And they were mostly trained by the Red Chinese and North Koreans. That's why they were like that. And then you had your NK people. It was more like Mandela's people. So they would fight back where they could, but if they get captured, and they use the courts to spread the word even more. So they were not as fanatical. How good were they as terrorists? No, not good. Not good at all. We don't rate them highly. But they did cause a lot of havoc. And of course, they had a good cause. They had extremely good cause, because you cannot tell me that apartheid was right. It wasn't right. It was wrong. And these people in the books will also tell you that. And it's also so that in the police and the army, there were a lot of integrated units, famous units like Special Forces, 5 Reconnaissance Commando Regiment, 3-2 Battalion, 3-1 Battalion, the Bushmen. All of these were integrated units, and they did fantastically well. Others were not. And the training would have been separate as well. Now, it was the same in the police. You would have been trained separately as basic policemen, but when you do your counterinsurgency course or any else, there would be black policemen there also. And what I found in my time in the police, and there's books written about this as well, you can go and read it if you wish. And what I found is that you found many police families under the black policeman. In other words, if his dad was a policeman, the son is going to be a policeman, and his son. Or granddad, they run down the line like this. And they're superbly good policemen because they are totally loyal to the Constitution as well as to the law. They don't care about politics. Now, that's how it was in my time. Now, Peter Ndebele is one of these things. His father was also a police warrant officer, sergeant major in army slang. He couldn't be promoted higher because that is as high as a black man in his era could go. Yes, you found here and there, you found somebody, but it was highly unusual to find a black policeman, even to get them armed, because at some states they were bare feet and they had an assegai with them. Later they got a truncheon, and much later in my time they were all armed. They were armed the same as us, paid the same as us, got the same medical as us, everything. There were no difference whatsoever. So for us in the forces, we were used to actually seeing black people as human beings. While I think in more on the civilian side, perhaps not. Don't get upset with me, guys. I know that it's more complicated like that. If you take any South African home, and you take, you will have many, many thousands, probably millions of maids being employed in white families. And these black women are part of a family. They eat what the rest eat. They are confidante of a madam, so to speak. And her children and the madam's children, they play with each other up to a point before the damn racism came in. And a lot of them become very, very, very close people. So don't, especially say to the Uitlanders now, the foreigners who might be listening here, it was a lot more complicated than what people like to tell you, especially the damn liberals. But anyway, they then rescue this general. They go against orders. Foxtrot decides he's going to take Peter Ndebele's platoon because it's the best platoon. They parachute down on the house where they know the general is. They storm the house. They kill everybody in the house. It's described in this book. And it's referred to many, many times in other books. But sadly, they're too late because the general is already dead. He was shot dead before they even left the aircraft. And he's dead because they didn't get the go-ahead from the government to go and rescue him. And at that stage, it was still the old government. It was in that period between before Mr. Mandela took over and after he was released. In other words, it was very uncertain. And I can tell you in those days, every damn politician was running for cover. I mean, they never got to book. They were ones who made the laws and they just got away with it. The guys who got arrested and we got sent to jail and they had to confess their sins, which is an unbiblical thing to do anyway. You're supposed to confess your faults, not your sins. The Bible was changed. See another book which I wrote, Oath of Evil, The War in Protestantism, if you're interested on how Bibles were changed to write Jesus out of the Bible. It's amazing. And they changed all these other things. But anyway, at the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or as we say, the Revenge of the Dark People, they actually got the junior officers there. They got people up to the rank of colonel, perhaps major general, which is, of course, not a junior officer. But the fact is the politicians just walked away. They got away with it. Hopefully that will change in the future. And I also did a series on the Legacy channel. You can go and look at it if you want to, where I talk about hostage survival. How to survive as a hostage in Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, because I know everything there is about it. I wrote the books and I dealt with it. And I put a series out. It's about eight lectures of about an hour each on how to survive, what to do, Lima syndrome, Stockholm syndrome. A lot of the information which I did in those lectures came out of the books. But I had the knowledge before I wrote the books anyway. I speak there about these people, the politicians who just doesn't want to go ahead because they're too flippant scared. They want the glory, you know. They want to, hey, oh, we rescued all these people. Oh, look at me, I'm a manly guy. But in fact, you're not, because they're too scared to give that order. So Foxtrot breaks the rules by doing that. And he's cashier. He's basically told to get out of the police and take Peter Ndebele with you because his career is also ruined. Both of them are ruined. And they leave. They become what they call egg breakers, which is something like special activities division, something like that, but it's called the egg breakers. Do they exist? Yes, absolutely. We have confirmation of them on Legacy by a Special Forces officer who mentioned where it started. I'm not giving you details. You'll have to go and search for it. But he definitely mentioned Project Ivory. That's where they started. And it's quite easy to find out there might be a egg breaker. You see who left. People who had high career prospects suddenly just left. And of course, they left again. I don't think we're involved with it anymore. If they were, I wouldn't have told you this. But anyway, to make a long story short, he searches the general's body. Because in those days, you would search for the body for booby traps, because they would put a hand grenade under him or explosives. You come, you move a body, boom, there it goes. It was a very, very dirty war. And we were involved with that, man. You should listen to Legacy Conversation if you want to know more. Of course, we don't tell everything because we can't. It's just too gruesome. But anyway, he searches the body, he finds the general's wallet, he opens the wallet to look inside it, looks for his appointment certificate as an officer in the police, because that thing is worth a lot of things. That's what they steal a lot of the times. Also they steal the credit cards and things. So he's not there to steal money. It's the same as I say to people, look, when you pass out next to a street, you see the medics come there, they take out your wallet, they start looking through it. They're not trying to steal ice cream money. They're trying to see is there anything indication what's wrong with you? Like if you're diabetic too, or you suffer from something, then you should have that on your phone as well. On her ice in case of emergency. Call my wife. Here's a number. This is my age. This is my illnesses. This is the medicine I'm taking. If you're diabetic, what is your perfect um, attainable blood sugar level which you are comfortable at? These guys don't know you. If they don't know you, they can't know you, and then they can treat you wrongly and you can die right there. It's the same. If you give somebody Sosigan or morphine after he's been shot, you have to inform the doctors, whoever is taking over from you, you've done this. Otherwise, they're going to inject him again and boom, there he goes. Murder. It happened. It certainly happened because the medics didn't, in the old days, you would just take blood or something and just write on his forehead, M for morphine or NM, no morphine or whatever, or Sosigan or whatever you had with you. But if you're interested in that, go again to Legacy Conversation. Go and listen to a series on the Special Forces doctors and medics called 7 Medical Battalion Group, where they're telling you these things as well. It is fantastic. But anyway, in the wallet, Foxtrot finds a picture of Angelique, who's a beautiful woman. She was in real life, still is, maybe, a fantastically good-looking woman. She was just there. She was in shape. She's dangerous. She speaks several languages. She's dangerous. That's how I would summarize her. Not a little bit either. She's truly dangerous. And he sees a picture of her, and she's standing with her parents, and he falls in love right there. Now, he's like a bachelor guy. He is married to Special Forces. And as the years go along, suddenly they get this call, the VFO call, and they go out and they meet Angelique, which is also in this book. And at that first meeting, things go wrong because he recognizes her. She knows who they are. I mean, obviously, she read the files. She knows they were ones who got cashiered because they went to rescue her dad. But she doesn't say a word. In fact, they don't say that they know who they are for many years. It's only about 12 years after they've been together or that they're working together that they actually declare that they know who they are. But through the books, if you read on and on, you will see here and there is a slip. She would ask him, listen, what would you call this new mission of us? And he said, code name Angelique. And she would be like, yeah, why that name? It's like, it's just a beautiful name, it's just a beautiful name. The problem here is Angelique is in command. She's a commanding officer. For her to get involved romantically with one of her agents, it's like, man, having sex in a church. You just don't do such things. It's just not, it's not on. And it's the same like that in most militaries as well. You just can't do that. And that's holding her back. But at this stage, anyway, she's still married. She found a guy, so they fell in love, they happily married. Foxtrot also found somebody, a French spy, and then in this book, sadly, she dies. She's blown up in Iraq, hunting, I think Bin Laden or somebody. She was hunting some famous terrorist. In real life, that character Marwa is based on my first wife who died. She was also part of the French espionage service. She is exactly like Marwa is described in the books in looks. That's how she looked. And she did not die in Iraq. She was killed in Europe. And forgive me if I don't give you more details, okay? Doesn't matter. May she rest in peace. So anyway, she dies in this bomb explosion, and Angelique, of course, knows this because she's friends with Marwa for many, many years. So she informs Foxtrot that his wife has passed, and he has to go and they arrange with him that he can go and fetch a body because he's a Muslim woman, she's got to be buried. He found out there while he's getting the body, he finds out that she was actually pregnant. She never told him because he wanted to give her early stages. He wanted to give him the news herself, and so he lost a son as well. It's a very it's one of those books that will make you cry. I think it's probably the most it's a book which I wrote many times. I was crying while I typed it because there were many incidents in it which reflected back to myself, to my own losses. So it's a very heartfelt book. It is not just, as we say in Afrikaans, kop skiet en donder, which translates to action movies. There's a lot of action in there because a man like Foxtrot is not going to take this lying down. He's going to go after these people. And I can tell you, I've worked in Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, for many years in the shadows. Exactly what I did doesn't matter. A lot of it comes out in the books, but again, it doesn't matter. There's nothing special about me. But we rate France, the French army and the French spies, actually very, very highly. I know that a lot of you is now like, oh, white flags, ooh, 1940, ooh. You know what? It was Winston Churchill, the hero of yours and not of mine, who said, unless you were there in France in 1940, don't judge. You don't know what happened. And the other thing he said, and this is in Parliament, you can go and research. Like I say to you, research my book. If I say to you something which is in the book, kindly research. Don't just take my word. You'll find out I know what I'm talking about. And there you will find that Churchill many times said, thank God for the French army. Because it was the French army who actually held the troops back for the Brits to run away from Dunkirk and other places. Yeah, they ran. I discuss it in some of the other videos here, and it's in a lot of the books. It's not a normal history. A lot of people got extremely angry. They got so angry and insulting that I banned him of the channel. And of course, they write the worst reviews you can think of in revenge. That's fine. You know what, man? I don't care. I brought the message. What people do with it is their problem. It's not for me to force anything. But the fact of the matter is the French army lost more men in that 6 weeks in fighting in 1940 that the British army lost during the entire 6 years of war. Yeah, we speak about that in one of the episodes as well. It's in many of the books. I think it's Codename Caribbean. Go and read that and please understand what we're telling you here. It's like just the other day, Donald Trump, and I used to like the man until I found out he's on a Jesuit influence, and man, he's a weird character. And he has no clue about history and he doesn't know what he's talking about. Still better than Hillary Clinton, I'll tell you that. He's a sight better than old Joe Biden. Who, by the way, is also under the Jesuit influence. But to understand what I just said, read Oath of Evil, The War on Protestantism, and you will see that sadly the US has now changed and is changing into a second beast of the Bible. That's why you're seeing all these strange things. But just the other day, Donald Trump came out with a most ridiculous statement to say that America actually won the Second World War and the First one. You know what, you're talking the biggest nonsense I've ever heard. The ones who won that war against Nazi Germany was the Soviet Union. That is where most of the fighting was taking place, about 70% of it. They were the ones who killed the most Nazis, not you. You were fighting with a mate. And of course, so were we. I have family members who fought on the British side, and we probably have family members who fought on the German side. But that's another story. So anyway, these characters do know the history, and they would bring these things out. And at this meeting where they first meet Foxtrot, Hillsong, and Angelique, they notice that she's different. But they do accept a command. And they go on a few missions, which is described in our books as well. And then, as I said, Foxtrot's wife passed. And Angelique now had problems as well because her husband's got cancer. Why? Because he was Israeli paratrooper. He then became a businessman. And the sister, who features in many of the books. In fact, the book after this one, codenamed Angel, which is about the South African nuclear program, very much based upon facts. And some people trying to smuggle nuclear weapons to Iran, I think. We don't really know because they were intercepted. But you have to read the book to understand. But there you will find a Mossad character who's in many of the books, called Deborah Arik. Not her real name, of course not. But Deborah Arik is the sister of Angelique's late husband. And he got this illness. It's only revealed in book 12, I think, codenamed Deborah. But he was being used to smuggle something which caused this cancer in him. And Angelique, of course, is very angry about that, and she wanted revenge, but at the other hand, she understands the risk you're running in that world as well. So now you find that both Angelique is now a widow, and Foxtrot is a widower. In this book, he's out there in Iraq, he's hunting down whoever killed his wife. And then he realized that he got the people with the help of the French Secret Service and other people, but he found out there's actually the reason why she was killed, and I'm not going to reveal it here, leads back to a British officer of MI6. And so he corners this guy in London, and Angelique gets involved because she's there as well. And she actually prevents him from killing this guy. It's a fascinating, heart-rending story. It is one of a even this morning when I was making some notes and reading it, I read the last part of a book again, where Angelique says to him, I'm your friend. And I've been your friend before you were born. And you're making a mistake. And I have to stop you from making this mistake. And so she does. And many books later, in Codenamed Crocodile, I think book 53. So now you're jumping from book 6 to 53. Angelique is about to make the same mistake. She's about to turn evil. She's about to commit almost mass murder. She's fighting for survival because people are really onto her. They know she's working for another agency. They don't know which one. In codename VFO, she's actually arrested. She's detained. And Foxtrot rescues her and get her out of the country, and that's where they get married. You understand now why I say that the first book's written, VFO 565 should be read at the end. But it doesn't matter if you don't. Don't worry about it. You'll still get the picture. But in that book, he refers back and he says, to remember all those years ago when you said to me, I'm your friend, and you're making a mistake. Angelique, I'm your friend. I'm telling you now, you're making a mistake. I will not allow you to do it. And let's go to Foxtrot, you know. It was a very hard book for me to write. It was a book where I really shed some tears, and I'm not a crying type, man. I cried twice in my life. No, 3 times. One was when my dog died, when I was still a child, and the other one was when my wife died. It was just dreadful. But in this book, you can see the clear emotion. There's a lot of emotion. So it's not the usual GMJ books. It's got all the normal things in there, all the history, everything which you should have is there. But it's really a different type of book. And after that comes Codename Angel. That is, as I said, where Angelique intercepts Zimbabwean intelligence officers who's trying to smuggle these weapons out of South Africa towards Iran, we think. We don't know because we never got there. But there you will see how how such an operation is done. It's actually based on a training scenario, but there's a lot of truth in it because when South Africa released Mr. Mandela, of course, it possessed nuclear weapons. And the Americans did not want Mandela to have nuclear weapons. I can tell you that. And Mr. Mandela was a pragmatic man. I know why, because I worked as a human rights attorney at his law firm, of a law firm presenting him. So I knew the man fairly well. I had interaction with him. He impressed seven sorts of hell out of me. Man, he was something else in those days. Later, when he got older, he got abused. It was really abuse, I tell you. But in those days, as this man, he would walk up to you and he would look at you like this. He says, "How are you doing? How's your mom?" And then a week or two later, your mom gets a letter from the president saying, "I met your son. He's a fine young man. I want to tell you I want to congratulate you." The man was just beyond belief. He was exactly like that. He was exactly like the legends made him. And I know there's a lot of people who say, "Oh, he was a terrorist." Yes, in certain ways he was a terrorist. And damn good reason to be one. And what happened afterwards in the country is horrendous. It is pathetic. But the thing is, that is not our fault who served. It's not our fault. They have to take the punches for themselves. I'm not going to do it. But Mandela agreed that the nuclear weapons should be dismantled, and they were handed over to the Americans for safekeeping or whatever. And in that book, and I don't want to go into detail about it, I'm just telling you what happened. Those nuclear scientists then were suddenly without a job. And then in the 90s, suddenly a letter arrives, and it starts becoming known in the intelligence world that these guys are saying, "Guys, you're either going to appoint us to do a job which we can do, and if you don't do it, we might have to go and find a job somewhere to do what we do." It was a clear, present danger and a threat to go and build nuclear weapons somewhere. Don't believe me? Do some research. And so that book is built around that, and that is where the first real operation starts, which is described in the GMJ books, is where Angelique and Gilsal and Foxtrot starts working together very closely to trace the weapons, to intercept it, to make sure those weapons don't go where they should have gone to. It's a fantastic book as well, one which I enjoyed thoroughly because Angelique comes into her own right. You discover her. You discover her how she was. In the first 5 books, she's a little bit on the background. She's being held back. But from these, and then this one too, Foxtrot 2, she's really on the background. But from Codename Angel, there you see Angelique operating like she did. Like we got used to her. And may I say, she put the fear of God into me then and now. But anyway, that is the book. It is available on Amazon. It is in hardcover, softcover, as well as audio. And it's not in any other thing. It's also in Kindle, but it's not on Apple format. Simple reason for that is because I believe I support terrorism. I'm not going to explain it again. Look at the other videos or read the books where we talk about it. And that's it. That's Codename Foxtrot. I really enjoyed that book. It's very close to my heart, in fact. It's one of those books which I really needed to write. I needed to write it. I needed to get certain things out of my system. And after that, I could, write the rest. So that's it. Thank you. God bless. Speak to you soon.